Face with a Name, which is our opportunity to talk to some of the staff, volunteers, and students that make Asheville Community Theater the place that it is. Today, I have the pleasure of speaking with Carina Lopez, who is the costume shop manager for ACT. Carina, thank you so much for doing this today. Can you get us started by just kind of telling us how long you've been at ACT and what it is that a costume shop manager does here?
So I have been with ACT since right after I graduated from UNC Asheville. So let me think, since about 2015.
So your title is costume shop manager, and I know that you also do a lot of the design work for the costumes as well. So how does your job break down in a typical week? What are you doing as far as managing the collection, and what are you doing as far as design?
Yeah, so I do a couple of things, as you mentioned, at ACT. So as the costume shop manager, I do a lot of work on keeping our collection in shape. I do a lot of inventory stuff. We do costume rentals, so making sure things are going in and out. We work a lot with local schools and other theater companies. And then also just keeping the costume shop in shape, making sure that our guest designers know where the supplies that they need are located, helping them navigate our stock, because we do have a very large costume stock. If you've never seen the warehouse that we have next door, it's quite a large space with double stacked racks that go back for a while. So we have very large stock that's a lot to navigate for our guest designers. And then as a designer for ACT, I do about half of our shows. I usually do 2 or 3 of our Mainstage productions a season, and then also do 1 or 2 of our youth productions. So for those, I'm going into rehearsals, meeting with the performers, doing measurements, going to production meetings, talking with the directors about what their vision is and how that fits in with costumes that we have in stock and things that we can make. And then the other part of my job is working backstage on the shows as the wardrobe supervisor. So for that, I join the team at Tech Week if I haven't already also been on the team as the designer. And I come in and I coordinate with the designer for the show, get their lists of all of the costumes, make sure I know the washing instructions on everything, how to care for things during the show. I help coordinate our dressers backstage who are helping with quick changes. And basically, I'm the person backstage who, if you have a question about your costume, if it breaks, if you're missing something, I'm the one to go to, because I'm the one who's keeping track of everything, making sure things are moving where they need to be moving, and fixing things in emergency situations.
Do you have a particular show or several shows maybe that have been sort of favorites to work on, either from a creative standpoint or just from a sheer enjoyment of the show standpoint? What are some of your standout favorites?
That is a good question. I think Alice in Wonderland was one of my favorites. That story, to me, I've always really connected with that story and loved just the innocence of that story. I love that it's very much an adult world seen through the eyes of a child. So I had a lot of fun with those costumes, and we ended up making a lot of costumes from scratch for that show. Yeah, that one was a really fun one for me because I had such a personal connection to that show, and that was my childhood book. So getting to create Alice's dress, I enjoyed doing that, trying to do something that when she walked out on stage, the audience instantly knew that it was Alice without just reproducing the Disney costume. I experimented with some different techniques for that one, the pool noodle wigs. So that was one of my favorites. as well as Wizard of Oz was really fun to work on. Did a lot of costumes from scratch for that one. Particularly, I really enjoyed the Wicked Witch's costume. That's one of my favorites.
So right now, when we're recording this, ACT is temporarily shut down because of COVID-19 and social distancing. And I know that has actually put a different spin on what you've been doing in the last few weeks. Tell us a little bit about the awesome project you've been working on.
Yeah, so one of the big things that I've been working on because of COVID-19, we've been working on face masks. There's a huge shortage of PPE, personal protective equipment, for healthcare workers right now. And so there are different initiatives to create face masks either for healthcare workers in areas where they're short, or to create face masks for just everyday citizens to help prevent the transmission, and to encourage everyday citizens who have any extra supplies of medical grade masks to donate them to facilities that are, on the front lines of dealing with this illness. So with ACT, we have gone through our big stash of fabrics and taken some of the odds and ends that we were holding on to but didn't really have a purpose for, and were things that maybe we could use but likely weren't that useful for costume making, and we're using them to make masks. We've donated to a few different places and a few different individuals in the community who are immunocompromised. But now we're working on a big push to get masks out to the street team at Beloved House. So they're going around to different businesses that are still open, different low-income apartment complexes, going out to people who are experiencing homelessness and passing out food and water and hand sanitizer and masks to try and help make sure everyone is as prepared and as safe as possible during these times. So we're working on a big push of about 300 masks is what I'm working on right now. I have a big stack here of fabric that's going to become masks.
And
But
some of our volunteers are also working with you on this, right?
yes, we have quite a few volunteers who have been sewing masks. We have a lot of awesome volunteers in our community who have stepped up in many ways on productions for us in the past, and now they're stepping up in an even bigger way to help the community through this, difficult time, using their skills and their craft as seamstresses to help protect those in need.
If there's somebody out there who's thinking, hey, theater sounds kind of fun, I am not ready to get up on stage and audition for something, I don't think acting's my thing, but I kind of know how to sew. How could someone get involved at ACT?
Yeah, we are always happy to have volunteers. I tell people all the time, if you know how to sew, that's awesome. I would love to have you in the shop. But even if you don't know how to sew and you're just interested in learning more about sewing, we're always happy to teach. Obviously, right now we're not meeting in person and doing, working on shows or that sort of thing. But when we do open back up and get going again, the costume shop is always full of volunteers, some of whom have been sewing for years, some of whom learned how to sew in the costume shop working with me on shows. I try to make it a really fun environment, and I try to get people involved in projects they're interested in. So sometimes we do have a lot of, hemming pants and more boring projects that we have to, work through. But I try to make sure that everyone is engaged in some way, that you're learning a new skill if you're interested in that, or you're doing something fun or getting something out of it. I like to make sure that people enjoy their time working with me and are advancing their sewing knowledge or spending time with friends. We have a lot of cool people down in the shop.
So is there anything else that you think people might find interesting that you'd like to share about either your regular work or work since the shutdown?
One of my favorite things about costume design is that it's basically a giant puzzle. So every time I approach a show, I have a certain amount of budget and I have, a certain amount of costumes that have to happen. And so my job is to take all of the pieces, take, things that we have in our costume stock, and then things that we can buy from Goodwill. And then once I have all of those pieces together, I get to figure out which pieces we have to make. What do we have in our fabric stash that we can use to make those last few costumes? What fabric do we need to buy? And so that's one of my favorite pieces of this creative process, is that especially in community theater, we're not building all of our costumes from scratch. In some ways it would be easier to build all of our costumes from scratch, because then everything would be, it would be made for the actor, it would all be cohesive, it would all go together. But instead we're taking these pieces that have been in multiple other shows. The same piece that was in Sweeney Todd is going to be in Little Women, and another piece that was in Alice in Wonderland is also going to be in there. So taking all of these pieces that come from very different shows and putting them together and making them look like they've always gone together. I think that's a really fun, creative part of the process for me.
Thanks, Karina. Bye.
Bye.